Look at that, what happens when you push the right cable into the right place. Yep, I've been moving things around. There we go. Since we are shooting a new video course right now, and I've been under the desk moving things around. And did I plug things into the right connection? I did not. But that's okay. That's why we do a pre-show. That's exactly why we do a pre-show right there. So if anybody ever wonders, why do you do testing? Why do you always check those things? Why do you have a fallback plan? That's why right there. That's the exact reason. So that's always good to know what's going on and when it's going. I have been moving things around. I had a connection for saving video. In fact, I should check my video stream right now. It looks really good. But I was moving some cables around under, really, you can't see it, on the left side of my desk are these little 19-inch racks, like a half rack that sort of supports the table. It's really an ingenious design on the desk. What's interesting about it, though, is that I was under there changing something else, and in the midst of doing that, unplugged the wrong thing. So, but it's working now. We are all good. The cache looks good. Data rates. Google is no longer complaining. YouTube's no longer complaining. We'll get there. I know. What is that thing sort of moving around the screen? That is the second hand. It's really a great clock. This is, someone asked me what this clock was. It's called Clock Phone. Clock Phone. Clock Phone. Well, they didn't spend a lot of time marketing, and quite honestly, why would you? It's a clock and it's on your phone, except it's really Clock iPad. Not sure what that means, but that's okay. We will figure it out when we get to that point. But it's called Clock Phone, and it works great. Let's see. We are really great shape now that we have video, and when you're on YouTube, it's great when you have the video there. We are doing great. We also, all the other cameras, let's make sure, the laptop, let's get it up and running. There we go. So now you can see my primary video are these 4 boxes in the middle. It's me, the big head cam, which is literally called, as you can probably see, head cam. There's the bird cam. For some reason, head cam is 2 words, bird cam is 1 word. It's the way it worked out, people. My Mac Studio, which is my primary system. That's what's in front of me. And actually the secondary screen is the Mac Studio. And then the laptop that I use for the slideware is there as well. It's ready to go. It's the one you see right here. So that's what's on that screen. Those 2 screens match up. These 2 screens match up. This is to the left, the Blackmagic streaming device that just does everything. It's a purpose-built appliance. All it does is stream. And you can see it gives me great stats. I can see exactly what's going on. I got an audio piece, and it's what told me, hey, why is everything black? Well, the chat room told me, why is everything black? So that's why, because I had the wrong things plugged in. I looked over and thought, yeah, it is. It's a little dark. It's darker than usual. It's a little bit less bright than it normally is. So we fixed it. We got less than a minute to go. Final checks are in place. I think we're in really good shape. I think what we really need to do is kind of get other pieces ready to go. There it is. And I'm really loving it. This is looking good. We're making it happen. Now it's the time to see how well we do with your practice, with your Q&A and other questions you might have. So feel free to lock those questions in as we get through this. We got a lot more to go through, and we'll start here in just a moment, and I'll give you an idea. If you've never attended before, I'll give you the entire breakdown of how you can participate live or on replay and all of those things. In the chat room, they're asking when the A+ retires. I'm glad you asked. It's right in the first 5 minutes. You are about to find out. So with that, let's take this and bring up Keynote. I need Keynote to have a green light. It does. Green light means play. There we go. I hit play. There we go. And there's our presentation. Here we are. It's top of the hour. Let's do a live stream, everybody. Not like that. There we go. That looks so much better when you do it that way. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 2024 Professor Messer 220-1101. That is the Core 1 A+ study group. Thanks for joining us on our tour through Q&A that has all the questions coming directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. So everything that we do today will be preparing you to take your Core 1 exam. If you are here live, we would love it if you could join us live. All you have to do is pop open a new browser window and browse over to this URL, which is professormesser.com/QA. That is the URL that will get you to all of the Q&A that we'll be doing today. It's the only one you need to remember today, which is kind of nice because now you know exactly the questions that will be showing up. You don't have to change it at all. It will simply change on your screen. In fact, I have a question waiting for you on your screen. We call this a rewind question, but it's a question we've done in a previous study group, and we're going to use that to see if you're able to get in and answer questions in the live stream. So the way that we do that is to answer a question right here that asks, which of the following would be assigned if a DHCP server was not available? Would it be one of these potential answers? And our standard policy is please do not put the answer in the chat room. Instead, you want to go to the URL that's on your screen, use that URL to be able to know exactly where you should answer the question. professormesser.com/QA. No answers in the chat room. Please, no hints in the chat room. The possible answers are 169.254.111.74, 165.245.224.10, 172.16, 123.160, 127.250.255.171, and 10.168.127.254. Now, I'm not going to go through those again because for some reason I decided to put a lot of numbers as the answers, but hopefully you know what the answer is. And if you think you know the answer, submit your answer online. Go to professormesser.com/QA. We're going to come back to this question in just a moment, so lock in your answer. In the meantime, I want to welcome you to our study group. Thank you so much for being here. If you are watching us live, thanks for joining us on the live stream. If you're watching on a replay, keep watching. You'll get the same questions and the same answers, so hopefully be just as valuable to you. Remember that when we're not doing a live stream, you can always find us on our YouTube channel at professormesser.com/YouTube. We also have a daily A+ pop quiz question. You can find that at professormesser.com/Twitter and professormesser.com/Instagram. Also want to let you know sometime during this first hour, you will hear me talk about a continuing education unit credit. And the way that you receive a 1-hour webinar category CEU is with instructions that I will give sometime during this first hour. So keep listening in, see if you can figure out when that happens, and then follow those instructions and I'll send you an email that verifies that you were here. Well, we will today be talking about the Core 1 exam for A+. As you probably are aware, you have to pass 2 exams to earn your A+ certification. This is the first of those 2, which is the 220-1101. There's also a 220-1102 exam. We will be doing a 220-1102 live stream on Thursday, 2 days from now. So those of you that need a Core 2 update, that's a good time to be here. This was released on April the 20th of 2022, and we estimate that this exam will probably be retired somewhere around the October timeframe of 2025. So as we sit here in June of 2024, you have plenty of time to study and pass both of those exams without any worry that either one of them will be going away. So very nice to have that time frame. We don't have to worry about that right now with A+. The 220-1101 and the 220-1102 exams are 90 minutes for each exam. On the 1101, we need to score 675 on a scale between 100 and 900. You have to do a little bit better in the Core 2. You have to score a 700 on the same scale between 100 and 900. The important part is as soon as you pass that second exam, you are certified for 3 years. So although they do change out and retire the different exam versions, once you pass your 2 exams, it really doesn't matter what they do to the exam versions. You are certified, you're locked in and certified for 3 years as soon as you pass both of those. So makes it a little bit easier to not have to worry about what time frames are associated with exams retiring. Once you're certified, that's all behind you. Don't have to worry about it at all. Today, we're going to be talking about information from the Core 1 exam. That's the 2201101, and that will be mobile devices, networking, hardware, virtualization and cloud computing, and hardware and network troubleshooting. So we have a number of different topics we're going to go through today. We will try to hit all of those at some point during this live stream. So feel free to stick with us because we do cycle through all of those as we go. Also let you know that we have a video replay of this available immediately afterwards on YouTube. I also create an audio-only version in a replay, and I distribute this in podcast format. If you would like to add this to your favorite podcast listening program, simply visit professormesser.com/podcast. It's a perfect place to go to add our A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus study groups. So if you are working out, you're traveling, you want to listen in to what we're doing here, it's a perfect way to have all of that right at your fingertips. We also have our podcasts available on many streaming services. So if you're on Spotify, simply search for Professor Messer and it'll simply pop up there. You don't have to download anything or configure anything else. Just search for us and we are right there. There is also on our YouTube video description, you don't see it now, but you will see it in about a day or so. There will be timestamps that just appear there, but they don't appear through magic. They don't appear through any automated process. It takes a human being to be able to do this. And my marketing manager, Lori, hi Lori, she's listening to this entire thing, going through the entire live stream, probably at 2x speed, and figuring out where all of these different timestamps are so that you can find it later on. This is available for all of our live streams. So if you are needing to find something quickly or you're wondering what was the answer to question 4, you can quickly find that in the list, jump right to it, and you are in great shape. So all of this will be available immediately afterwards for replay on YouTube, and then about a day later for the timestamps. So very useful to have that there. Thank you, Lori. And hopefully the chat room, if you find some value on that, you're welcome to thank her as well, because we get to see the replay of the chat go by while we're watching the replay of the video. While we are not doing a live stream, we're still here. We're still doing some work. So you can always find us on our Discord chat. And if you'd like to join that, we'd love to have you there. Some great folks there studying for their A+ exam at professormesser.com/discord. It is a great way to keep track of what other people may be doing, maybe find someone to study with, maybe just get with a group of people who are also trying to find the same study materials, go through the same study materials, understand these topics, go through the exam objectives. A great group there and a fantastic community. Find out more, go to professormesser.com/discord. Eventually, you will need to take the A+ exam. Unfortunately, some things in life will require you to purchase the exam, something you can't avoid. And of course, there are different ways to pay for the exam. You could go to the CompTIA website and pay full price, or you can visit my site at professormesser.com/vouchers. And if you are in the US, Canada, or a US territory, you can get your vouchers at a discount. Who doesn't like to save a little money on their vouchers? The exact same voucher, it's just a little bit less when you get it at the Professor Messer website. Also, if you purchase it from my site, I want to give you something a little bit extra, something you can't get anywhere else. This is a book that I wrote called The CompTIA Exam Hacks, where I've taken all of the tips and tricks that I've accumulated through my years of being a technologist and working in this field and put it into one single document that has a set of life hacks, if you will, except they're for exams. Perhaps there might be even something in there that can help you during the exam itself, get a few extra points. And that's for you to have absolutely free when you purchase a voucher from the Professor Messer website. We don't sell that separately. You can only get it with a success bundle or with a voucher. And that's the only way you would be able to find this particular book. Find out more, go to professormesser.com/vouchers. Let's look at the question I asked earlier, which is, which of the following would be assigned if a DHCP server was not available? Would that be, I guess if I could put me in there, would that be A, 169.254.111.74? Would it be 165.245.224.10, 172.16, 123.6.160? 127.250.255.171, or 10.168.127.254. I kind of rushed through those a little bit, but hopefully you can see them on the screen. More importantly, what did you choose? In this, we'll stop our poll and see that 67%, which by the way is more than answered this correctly last month, is the answer at the very top, 169.254.111.74. That is the answer that we were looking for, because when you don't have a DHCP server, you are assigned an IP address automatically through the automatic private IP addressing, or APIPA. This provides an address that allows you to at least communicate to devices on your local network. We've called it a link local whenever you start working through it. There is a group of IP addresses specifically set aside just for this. And that range has been reserved from 169.254.0.0 through 169.254.255.255. They have also taken the first and last block, 256 address block of this, and also set those aside. So normally those are not distributed either, which means that you will get an IP address somewhere between 169.254.1.0 through 169.254.254.255. So there is a good example of how you can be provided an IP address that can at least get you partial communication with other devices that are on your local network. But because it is a link local address, anybody who has these range of IP addresses can only communicate in your local subnet. You cannot route that information. So that is a very good example of trying to figure out where you would be able to communicate if you were assigned an APIPA address. I feel a follow-up question coming up maybe next month about APIPA and what you would be able to communicate with if you were assigned an APIPA address. All the other addresses in this list are addresses that could be automatically assigned. They could be assigned by as a private address, as a public address. The important part here is the only one that you would receive if a DHCP server was not available, in most likely you would see, is the one that you see here, 169.254.111.74. Hopefully you're familiar with the APIPA. If you're not, you might want to have a look. You can always find these. If you think that you've been assigned one, have a look at the IP configuration of your system, and you'll see that it was called, it might even, when you look at the IP address, you might even see that the 169.254 address that you've been assigned is actually noted as an auto configuration IPv4 address, to give you a little bit more of a heads up that indeed something there might be important to know about. And indeed, I would say in this case, that is something that you would want to know about. We did pretty well on that one. Well, how many people did? 67% of you got that one right. So well done with that one. That's an important piece of information to know, not only for the exam, can really help you if you're in the process of doing some troubleshooting. So another one of those that is going to be really useful for you to take advantage of, regardless of where you might be using this, either in a testing environment or in a real world troubleshooting environment. Well, enough of questions where we've had to go through this list of questions that we have done previously. Let's give you some new questions. And of course, I have some for you. As many of you know, whenever we start with our new questions on a study group, I give you a performance-based question. Now, some of you have never taken a CompTIA exam, may not even be aware of this, that when you sit down to take the exam, a large number of the questions you receive will be multiple choice questions. In fact, the ones we just did, where there was a question and then multiple answers to choose from, that's a multiple choice question. We're pretty familiar with those. But on the very beginning of the A+ exams and the Network Plus and Security Plus and many of the others with CompTIA, you get a handful of performance-based questions. Performance-based questions are questions that are anything but multiple choice. So they could be a fill-in-the-blank question. It could be a matching question. It might be a question that's a drag-and-drop question. It's simply a different way to ask you about the information that comes directly from the CompTIA exam objectives in a form that just doesn't happen to be multiple choice. So I have for you a performance-based question to start our study group. This one is a bit of a fill-in-the-blank question, I think, because all I listed here is a question, and it says, list the protocol, TCP or UDP, the port number, and the name of the protocol. And I have for you 5 different situations, 5 different descriptions where I would like you to fill this in. So the first is automatically assign an IP address to a device. So what is the protocol, TCP or UDP? What is the port number? And what is the name of that protocol? I want you to tell me that. There's a lot here to fill in the blank. We have to really remember, I didn't drag and drop this one to make it easier. You have to actually fill in the blank on this one. Second on our list is receive an interface alert from a switch. What would be TCP port? What would be the port number? And what would be the name? All of those need to be put in. Third on our list is determine the IP address associated with an FQDN. I look forward to your cards and letters telling me how that is not when you use A and N. A and an, but it is, actually works properly there. The D is transfer messages between 2 email servers. Is it TCP or UDP? What is the port number and what is the protocol? And lastly, send a job to a Windows network printer. So all 5 of those are using different port numbers, different protocol names, and then you'll have to figure out whether it's TCP or UDP, although technically the exam objectives don't ask you about TCP or UDP when it relates to port numbers, but I do because it's important and you need to know it when you aren't taking the exam on this one. So let's see how you do with this one. Again, we want to automatically assign an IP address to a device, receive an interface alert from a switch, determine the IP address associated with an FQDN, transfer messages between 2 email servers, or send a job to a Windows network printer. Those are 5 challenging port numbers that we have to remember. So see how well you do with this one. There may be some thinking involved. So the chat room is bemoaning the idea of thinking through this one, but these are questions that could certainly come up on your exam. If you think you know the answer, follow the link that is on your screen, professormesser.com/QA, to lock in your answer. Please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. Yes, I'm with the chat room where thinking is most of the time optional. That would be nice, but in this case, we do have to figure it out. If you take it one at a time and you sort of work through the different pieces of it, maybe you know some things. Maybe you think you know the protocol name, but you don't know the port number. Well, lock it in. We will figure it out and see what it is on the other side of this. But this is our opportunity to get it wrong as well. This is our chance to see what we don't know. And if we are looking through this and wondering, I don't know any of these things, this is a good time to make a note of that so that you can go back to your studies and lock in what the importance of port numbers might be. I think a lot of people look at the list of port numbers and they see it just as a memorization thing. And certainly there is some memorization associated with this. Well, there's memorization associated with the entire certification. But for this particular set, a lot of people spend their time only looking at a port number and the initials. They don't even go through the actual words of what it happens to be. So I would recommend you look at a little more than that because the exam wants you to know more about what these are as well. It's not just knowing a port number and what it happens to be. And there is already questions about partial credit. No partial credit. No partial. Well, you might get partial credit. Maybe you won't. But the problem with the exam is you'll never know whether you get partial credit or not. And they are not guaranteed to give you that. Although they said they might, but they might not. They also said they might not. So there's your problem with these exams is you never know how they're graded. You will never know how they were graded. And you'll never know if you got partial credit or not. So it's nice to think that we might. Maybe we do get partial credit. That would be nice to think that way. But in this particular case, I don't know that we can guarantee that. Lock in your answer. Visit the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock into this. We'll talk in just a bit on where this comes from so that you can really break down what these differences are between all of these different scenarios and port numbers and tasks and things to know about. I think a lot of people see that list of port numbers on the exam, and sometimes I think they're concerned that this is too much to know. But almost like anything else, once you start using them, they just become second nature, and you almost forget that you even memorized them to begin with. I think that's probably a good way to approach this too. If you're ever in the case where you just can't memorize something, try using it. Try configuring a firewall rule in your personal firewall. You have Windows Defender on your Windows machine, configure a custom rule that uses one of these port numbers, and that's kind of locks it in your brain. You used it for something, and then you now can remember that if it happens to come up on the exam. Let's see how you did on this one. Let's see if you can remember all of this information. I did ask a lot of you on this one. So let's see, let's really step through each one and see if we happen to know what these are. I'm going to get to my next slide. I can't believe I did. Okay, let's step through each one of these. Let's start at the very top. First one on your list is automatically assign an IP address to a device. And if you've ever, I think most of us even do this, practically everyone who's plugging into either a wired Ethernet network or a wireless network these days gets their IP address automatically. Very rarely do we manually configure an IP address, certainly on end stations, and that's because we are using DHCP, the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. DHCP commonly uses two different port numbers. There's not a lot of protocols out there that require the use of multiple port numbers. Well, DHCP is one of them. You also, if you're keeping track of this on the exam objectives, FTP is the other one you need to know about that uses more than, or potentially could use more than one port number. The two port numbers used by DHCP are both UDP port numbers, UDP port 67 and UDP port 68. So these are two very good port numbers to choose from if you're capturing traffic from the network and you're trying to capture this conversation that takes place, the DORA conversation, when someone is receiving or at least trying to receive an automatic assignment of an IP address. It's DHCP that does all of that. So we may want to filter on UDP port 67 and UDP port 68, and we certainly need to know that it is DHCP. It's an important thing to know that it is DHCP. Next on our list, receive an interface alert from a switch. Well, we would have to know how we get an interface communication at all from these devices, and commonly that is done with an SNMP trap, the Simple Network Management Protocol. SNMP also uses UDP port 162 to be able to receive that alert. Yeah, SNMP is designed so that you have a workstation or a management station on your system, on your network, and you reactively query devices. You ask it, have there been any errors on this system in the last 5 minutes? How much utilization has gone through a particular interface in the last hour? How many people are connected to this device in the last 15 minutes? And you get a response back from that device telling you utilization is this, here's the number of IP addresses, and the list of those is now provided in the response. But you can also have that device be more proactive, where it can tell you when a problem is occurring. And you configure that device. If you get a lot of interface errors, if you get an increase in CRC errors, for example, send me an alert. We refer to that alert as an SNMP trap. And SNMP trap by default uses UDP port 162 to communicate. So make sure you're familiar with SNMP. I guess technically SNMP would be one of those that has two different port numbers in use, although one port number is used for one function and one port number is used for a completely different function. SNMP by default uses UDP port 161, and then if you're receiving a trap, that is sent to you over UDP port 162. Next on our list is determine the IP address associated with an FQDN. I guess it's helpful if you know what that is if you're trying to answer these questions, and CompTIA does this all the time where they sneak an abbreviation, an acronym, into the list so that you have to first decipher what the acronym is referring to so that you can then decipher the rest of the question. And this is one of those. Determine the IP address associated with a fully qualified domain name. A fully qualified domain name would be something like www.professormesser.com. That's a fully qualified domain name. It has all of the different components of the host, the domain, and the upper level, the top level domain, the TLD. TLD would be com. My domain name is Professor Messer, and then the name of the host or the device is www. So if you wanted to know the IP address of professormesser.com, that obviously doesn't have the IP address in it, how could you receive that information? Well, you would need to query a name server. And if you were querying a name server, you would probably use the DNS protocol, the Domain Name System Protocol. DNS operates also UDP port 53. I chose a lot of UDP in this list today for some reason. UDP port 53 for DNS, although DNS can sometimes, when it has to transfer a large amount of data, use TCP. So that one can go either way, but most of the time when you're performing a fully qualified domain name check, you're simply performing what we call a DNS query. That query is almost always going to use UDP. So I would say in this case, the right answer is UDP. Technically, right answer could possibly be both TCP and UDP. So that's fine with that. Next on our list is transfer messages between two email servers. So email servers, the way it works is if you're sending out an email, you send it to your local email server. Your local email server looks at that email and says, well, that needs to go to a completely different email server located in a completely different domain. I'm going to send it from my mail server, my SMTP server, to the remote SMTP server. And at that point, that SMTP server will be responsible for getting that email where it needs to go using the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, SMTP, and by default, it uses the TCP protocol over port 25. Hopefully, though, your SMTP server is probably using the more secure version of that, but for the purposes of the exam, we only need to know the insecure or the standard port number used by SMTP, and it is TCP port 25. And last on our list, you have to be somewhat knowledgeable in the way that Windows operates in order to answer the question where we need to know how to send a job to a Windows network printer. We're going to simply send this to a different printer that's on our network, a Windows printer on our network, which means that we're going to use a specialized protocol that is commonly used for sharing files, being able to transfer data from one system to another, and to submit print jobs to a printer. If you're using Windows, then you're probably using SMB to be able to do that. That's the protocol that we like to use, Server Message Block. That SMB protocol is not exclusive to Windows, but it is very common to find in a Windows environment. SMB is used for other operating systems as well to be able to do this. And TCP port 445 is the direct SMB connection using IP. That is the protocol and the type you definitely need to know. So those are the 5 different scenarios and the port numbers that would be most associated with these. Now, to be fair, on your exam, they might only ask you for a port number. So in A would be 67 and 68, B would be 162, C would be 53, D would be 25, and E would be 445. But that really doesn't help very much understanding what those protocols do. And in fact, on your exam, it's much more likely to have a question where they want you to tell them that you understand what DNS really does, what SMB is really responsible for, in what cases would you ever see DHCP. So as I mentioned earlier, don't just memorize 67 is DHCP, 162 is SNMP trap, 53 is DNS. If you only memorize that information, you will probably not have enough information to be able to answer the questions that are posed to you on the exam, because CompTIA rarely asks those trivial questions of what port number is used by DNS. You're just not going to get a question like that on your exam. Instead, it will be more like this, where they say, I want you to determine the IP address associated with a fully qualified domain name. What would you use for that? And then you have to reverse engineer. exactly what they were looking for. Hopefully you're familiar with these port numbers. This is not all of the port numbers you need to know. Oh no, there's more. There's a lot more port numbers you need to know, but they're all listed in the exam objectives. So make sure you have a copy of those objectives. And in fact, someone came to our Discord the other day and showed me a list of what must have been 50 or 60 port numbers they were given by somebody to memorize. And I said, well, you only need to know about 20 for the exam, maybe even a little less than that. So have a look at the exam objectives. They tell you exactly what you need to know. There's no reason to study things that are outside the scope of those exam objectives. CompTIA tends to stick to those exam objectives very, very, very closely. And if you are struggling or trying to work your way through port numbers, I would highly recommend you grab the exam objectives and use that as your study materials. Well, hopefully that's given you some context on performance-based questions. Why don't we shift gears back to a multiple choice-based question? It's feeling better already, isn't it? This question asks, which of the following would be the most likely use of a DB9 connector? Would that be a switch configuration, a Windows installation, an internet hotspot, wireless speakers, or an iOS charger? So we have to choose which one of these it might be. If you think you know the answer, please don't answer in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. We want to use the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. Again, the question asks, which of the following would be the most likely use of a DB9 connector? Would it be switch configuration, Windows installation, internet hotspot, wireless speakers, or iOS charger? You know, what's interesting about this one is that it could potentially be more than one of these answers. But the question asked which would be the most likely use of this. And this is not unusual to find on an exam where they will have you go through this list and be able to find what the most likely use of this would be, even if technically other answers could apply to this particular scenario. So this is a really good example of that. So hopefully the main primary answer is one that jumps out at you and you're able to lock that one into this list. See what you can do with it. See how much the view of this is going to be for you. Again, please no answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. Instead, you want to follow the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA to lock in your answer. Let's see how you did. I think a number of people are still busy Googling what a DB9 connector is. Well, it's too late now because we are going to figure out what the answer is. The question again is, which of the following would be the most likely use of a DB9 connector? Is that for switch configuration, Windows installation, internet hotspot, wireless speakers, or iOS charger? We're going to stop the poll. And the answer, by far, 88% of you say the answer is switch configuration. Is this one where we ended up answering the wrong answer and we all just chose the wrong answer, or did we all get it right? We're about to find out. Only 5% say Windows installation, 2% say wireless speakers, 1% for internet hotspot, and 1% for iOS charger. A DB9 connector is this one here. We refer to these as a serial interface. That's the old school name of it. We've, of course, taken this idea of the older DB9 connector and we have improved on it and created a new style of serial interface that is more universal. It's a bus of a serial that is universal, and we call it a universal serial bus, or USB. So very nice that we were able to take the old style, simply upgrade it, put better connectors on it, and now we've almost forgotten about the old DB9 connector. This is one that commonly sends serial communication, and if you wanted to be technical with it, the signal that you're sending over this link is an RS-232. So if you happen to see a connection or some type of reference to RS-232, they're probably talking about one of these old school serial type connections. These are, if you go way back before we had USB, this was a connector type we used for a lot of different interfaces. We connected printers with DB9. We connected our mouse with a DB9 connector. We connected third-party scanners with this. There were lots of ways to use this. These days, what we commonly do with this is use it to plug into configuration interfaces on switches, routers, and other infrastructure devices. That's really the only use of these days. It's even hard to find devices that even have a DB9 on it. Find a laptop that's got DB9. You have to go out and hunt for the laptop model that has DB9 on it. I'm sure there's probably some government requirement that some of these have. So you will still find Dell and other places still selling laptops with DB9 connectors. I think most people these days are using a USB converter that will convert from a USB interface to a DB9 and then allow you to plug into a DB9 connector. That's what I would always take around with me so that I didn't need to have a laptop with this older, relatively large, in modern terms, DB9 connection on it. And of course, if you chose switch configuration, just as I mentioned, that is the right answer. That's what we were looking for. It would not be an internet hotspot. We commonly would use 802.11 for a connection like that, maybe Bluetooth if it's a single device. Wireless speakers commonly use Bluetooth. They would not use a wired DB9 connection. iOS charging is commonly used with USB, USB-C, or an older Lightning connection are common there. And a Windows installation is really the only other one that could technically apply here. For those of you familiar with Windows, there's a debug feature with Windows that allows you to take a serial interface from a Windows machine and put it on another device monitoring the output, and you're able to run Windows and output debug data over the serial connection. Really does work. And it's not something we commonly use in our day-to-day. In fact, if you're not doing any type of Windows development, you've probably never used it and you probably don't need to. So that's the only other one that could technically be right, but it's so unusual and so rare to use. It does not fit our question, which asked for the most likely use of this. And most likely uses would be a switch configuration, a router configuration. It would probably be an older switch or an older router. It's even hard to find DB9 on the modern devices. Most modern devices simply have a USB type B connection on them. You just plug directly in. Some newer devices even have USB-C. Just plug in with a USB-C connection instead of doing all of this, which much more convenient, obviously, than using some of these old style DB9 type connections. But you will probably have a DB9 cable stuck in your bag because you never know when you're going to run into something like this. There's some great options out there for creating very modular RJ45 connected devices. So you can unplug and plug the right connector onto the end and then create that as your final cable. That's what I used to use when I would carry things around. That is the right answer, switch configuration, and 88% of you got that one absolutely right. Let's see if we do just as well with the next question that is on our list. This next question asks, a network administrator is configuring an AAAA record on the corporate DNS. Which of the following would describe this record type? Would it be an email server IP, a configuration serial number, a list of valid email servers, an alternative name of a DNS server, or an IPv6 address? In this case, I think there are probably two answers here that would probably be exactly the right answer. Hopefully you're familiar with this particular question. This isn't just one where I put in a place and I didn't fill in the words. Those are actually what they are. A network administrator is configuring an AAAA record. That wasn't a typo or a mistake. On the corporate DNS, which of the following would describe this record type? An email server IP, configuration serial number, list of valid email servers, alternative name of DNS server, or an IPv6 address. Maybe you know what this one happens to be. Some of you that have been working with your DNS servers, maybe you're familiar with it. Here's the link where you can lock in your answer. Go to professormesser.com/QA. Lock in your answer. This may be a good one if you are configuring DNSs, and eventually someday you will be configuring a DNS. All I can tell you is that if you've been tasked with configuring a DNS, try not to. Try not to make any changes to your DNS. If you definitely would like to create significant problems, the DNS is one of the best places to do it. You can really mess up a network pretty well. You can bring down an entire email service with one single typo on a DNS. No pressure though, but I guess really that's why when we talk about the ability to move up and have more responsibility and make more money in this industry, that's the trade-off. Is very often we are making changes that can have a dramatic impact on an organization. So make sure you are familiar with these when you are working with them. It's always good to know exactly what you are doing when you are working with DNS. Let's see how you did with this one. The question asks, a network administrator is configuring an AAAA record, quad A, on the corporate DNS. Which of the following would describe this record type? Is it an email server IP, a configuration serial number, a list of valid email servers, an alternative name of a DNS server, or an IPv6 address? It's got to be one of these. Let's see what you chose. We're going to stop the polling. And as I mentioned, as I'm reading through this one, this could technically be more than one answer. And I'll explain why in just a moment. But as you can see on the screen, 57% of you say the answer is an IPv6 address, which is probably about right when you're working through here. 20% though say this is an alternative name of a DNS server. We've also got 12% that say it's a list of valid email servers. 6% say it's an email server IP, and 2% say it's a configuration serial number. Now, one of the things that I really find, 57% of you say that it's IPv6 address. And I think when you get into working with address records in a DNS server, there are two different kinds of address records that you will find. One is an A record, A, and the other is a quad A record. This is where you would tell the DNS server what the actual IP address is for that particular device. And you would put it as the A record or the quad A record. This is also, if you run into an A record, it's always going to be an IPv4 address. So if you ever need to configure, in fact, if you look at my web server, www.professormesser.com, there is a IPv4 address right after that. In fact, I may even have a screenshot of it here somewhere. Well, if 1A is IPv4, quad A is for IPv6. So you probably saw that coming. So if you are needing to tell your DNS server, here is the IPv6 address for www.professormesser.com, you would add that to your DNS as a quad A record. So a little bit different than simply using an A record. This is an A record. You can see it in the list where you've got professormesser.com. The IN stands for internet. A stands for the record type. It is an A record, which means the next piece of information here is an IPv4 address, and there it is. And there's a semicolon, which designates that everything after this is a comment. And this simply says that's for Professor Messer. So that's a good example of an A record. You'd pretty much do the same thing on a quad A record. In fact, this is a quad A record right here that we're editing. It's not a command line. It's more of a different breakdown. And for example, the host name here is stream, and the IP address you can see is 1B212118 Charlie Delta. It's not even accurate IPv6. I think I deleted the rest of it. Is why you don't see the rest of it on here. I think I smudged it out. We context sensitive delete. Got rid of everything else for me, thankfully. And the time to live is 15 minutes, which means if you asked this 15 minutes ago, and on minute 16, if you still need to access the server, you'll need to perform another DNS query to receive that IP address again, because I might change it. And that's the beauty of DNS. I can change it in one place. It updates for everybody in 15 minutes because that's my default time to live. Well, that is the right answer. IPv6 address. A quad A record is always going to have an IPv6 address associated with it. Now, I did say in this list that an email server IP could be that. Now, I was approaching this question with the other DNS record type. So I was thinking of an MX record right here. MX stands for mail exchange. And a mail exchange record doesn't have an IP address on it. It has a name of a mail server. And then there also has to be somewhere else the resolution that finally gets you to the IP address of that device. But technically, a quad A record could contain the server IP of an email server. I mean, it could. So I think if you're one of the 6% that said email server IP, I think I'll give you credit on that one. I think technically you would be correct. And what's better than being technically correct, right? Now, the others that are here are not technically correct. So an alternate name of the DNS server, or an alternative name of the DNS server. You can certainly configure CNAMEs, canonical names, inside of a DNS record. That is what that's referring to, but a quad A record does not contain any of those canonical names. 12% of you said a list of valid email servers. Of course, again, having this nice MX record as a list of servers is important, but has nothing to do with the quad A record and what you would put inside of it. And then a configuration serial number usually is the start of authority, the SOA record on a DNS server, where you can increase the serial number so that anyone pulling down that DNS configuration will know if it has been changed, because they can see if the serial number has been changed at the top or the header in the start of authority record. In this case, the one that is the best answer, the right answer, the one I was looking for, and hopefully the one you got, was indeed IPv6. 57% of you got that one absolutely correct. I've been talking a lot on this one. I'm looking at the clock and thinking, we're nowhere even close to where I want to be right now. I've really been slowing this one down. So don't worry, we will get through a couple of extra questions, even if we have it go into overtime today. So I apologize right now for sort of slowing things down, but I think some of the information we're going through is really important for your exam. So hopefully you think so as well. Let's now take a quick review of what we've done so far. So we've talked about the A+ exams. We've gone through a little bit of hardware. We've talked about some networking configurations, the DNS details, and we haven't really even gotten into security, mobile devices, cloud computing, and all of the other things you would expect to see on an exam the scope of A+. And A+ is a very large exam when you start stepping through things. That's why I took everything that was on your list, that huge set of exam objectives, and everything that's in my videos, and I put everything into one set of notes. So even if you can't watch every video, even if you aren't capturing every bit of information on the video, I have course notes that give you all of this information already written out. So if you're a bad note taker, maybe you'd like a more comprehensive list of notes. Maybe you'd like a digital version that you could put on all of your mobile devices. I have it right here. All of your port numbers, all of the information about wireless networks, everything that is text, all of the important graphics, all of the important charts, they are in my course notes. Now, not only do we have these digital course notes, we also have this in a physical form made with dead trees. So those of you familiar with when you used to use paper, this is what paper looks like. And it's exactly the same information you get in the digital version, but it's just in a form that you can pick up and take with you and actually look at. And in fact, there is something nice about flipping through the pages of this fully color, very well put together, perfect bound paperback version of our course notes. If you purchase the physical version, I obviously have to ship this to you, but you get the digital version for free that you can download immediately and start working through. So something useful that you might want to try. If you're interested in the notes or you'd want to learn more, check our website. Go to professormesser.com/1101notes, or simply follow the main menu from the top of the Professor Messer website. We'll take you right to where those notes might be. Well, let's do some more questions. And those of you in the chat room, we're talking about quad A. In our last question, we talked about this quad A record. And why is it quad A? Now, I've always been told it's quad A because there are other abbreviations we used for 2 and 3A. For example, AAA is our authentication, authorization, accounting server. This is a good example of where if we have A in our configuration and we do a typo and we put 2 A's, well, that just means nothing. So I think it's also a good typo check, making sure that we know that IPv4 is A. If you're doing IPv6, it's a very different set of letters. You can't really mess that one up very easily. You have to work hard to mess that one up. I guess I could, but you would have to work hard to do that. Let's do another question. Here's the next question on our list, and it asks, after a drive failure, a system administrator has replaced the bad drive in the array and restored from a backup. Which of the following would describe this drive array? Would this be RAID 0+1, RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 1+0? All RAID types there. It's a RAID question. Let's see if you know it. The question again asks, After a drive failure, a system administrator has replaced the bad drive in the array and restored from a backup. Which of the following would describe this drive array? Is it RAID 0 plus 1, RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 1 plus 0? If you think you know the answer, follow the link on your screen. Go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. See if you know what this one is. I like a lot of you are talking about my book and how it is paper. Now, I wasn't planning to print one of these out, and I showed the digital version to Mrs. Professor Messer, and she said, well, where's the book? I want to feel it. I need to touch it. I need to have it. So this is thanks to her and working through it. Now, since we're talking about RAID, no, we're not doing an ad. We're not doing a live read on top of RAID for this. I really don't do gaming ads, and I don't do VPN ads, and you're welcome to be able to do that. I probably just couldn't stand, at least not yet. Wait, when I hit rock bottom, when everything's going bad, you'll know when. Like, hey, he's doing a gaming ad. Then you'll know something horrible has happened at that point. Let's hope that doesn't ever occur. A lot of people already locked in their question on this or answer on this one. Let's see if you know what this one happens to be. The question again asks, after a drive failure, a system administrator has replaced the bad drive in the array and restored from a backup. Which of the following would describe this drive array? Would it be RAID 0 plus 1, RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, or RAID 1 plus 0? What did you choose? Oh, we're all over the place. Oh, well, this is one of those where I like it when we all get the question right, but I think I equally like it when we all get the question wrong, because it gives us a chance to really sift through this to figure out why we thought it was something else. So let's go through these. We can see that 29% of you said RAID 1, 28% of you said RAID 0. So effectively a tie for first place. And if we sort of open it up a little bit, you can see that 20% said RAID 5, 13% said RAID 1 plus 0, and then about 8% said RAID 0 plus 1. So the real piece of this question that was the important part is not the part where we replace the bad drive. Of course, we're going to replace the bad drive. And of course, with it, when you're replacing a bad drive in array, you only replace the bad drives. If you ever see a question where it talks about replacing all drives in a RAID array when a single drive failed, you know that's not the right answer either. So of course, you would only replace the bad drive. But the part of the question that should give you more direction is the second part where it says, and restored from a backup. Of the RAID types that are listed here, there is only one RAID type here that you would require a restoration, because RAID is one where most RAID types maintain redundancy of the data, that even if you lose a drive, you're still up and running. There's no need to restore from backup because you didn't lose anything. But there is one RAID type that does not provide redundancy, and that is zero redundancy with RAID 0. That's how you remember it. So on RAID 0, you are taking the data that you are saving and you are putting a little bit on one drive and a little bit on another drive. Not a duplicate of that. You're literally splitting the information across multiple drives. So there you go. That is why if you were to lose this physical drive, you would effectively lose half of your data in this particular scenario with only 2 drives. If you would lose this physical drive, disk 1, you also lost half your data. So this is a really good example of whenever you are looking at redundancy and looking at how to recover from a failure, you have to understand how the redundancy would affect you to begin with. And indeed, in this case, disk 1, disk 0, and disk 1, losing either of those in a scenario that is configured with RAID 0. Sometimes you'll hear us refer to this as striping, because we're striping a little bit on one drive and a little bit on the other drive for higher performance. But with that higher performance, we have the problem of having no redundancy. And if we lose one drive, it breaks the array, we lose data. And the only way to get that drive back up, that array back up and running again with our data, is to restore it from a backup. You made a backup, right? You know that RAID is not backup. RAID is never backup. RAID is not a backup system. Do not use RAID for backup. You need a backup system of your RAID to have this here. And of course, if it's RAID 0, you need a backup anyway. And that is why in this question, we talked about having a failure and replacing the drive. If we're ever restoring from backup, it's probably because it was a RAID type that provided 0 redundancy. And if you're running RAID 0, then you have 0 redundancy. Now, what's interesting in these answers, though, all of the other answers have redundancy. RAID 1 is mirroring. It has redundancy. RAID 5 is striping with parity. It has redundancy. And then RAID 0 plus 1 and RAID 1 plus 0 is a combination of striping and mirroring in the same system, although both of those arguably are different configurations, different designs in that redundant, but they're still redundant nonetheless. So all of the other RAID types on the screen provide redundancy. And if you were to lose, for example, a RAID 5 drive, you got a drive on your RAID 5 array and a drive failed, the users of that array may not even know the drive failed because all the data is still accessible to them. They might not even see any difference whatsoever because there's redundancy. And in fact, if you replace the bad drive, you're now resynchronizing that drive across the array. You don't have to restore from a backup. So all of this other recovery for all of these other RAID types are always about resynchronizing the RAID and getting everything back to where it should be. We don't have to go back to a backup tape, thankfully, to be able to manage that. The answer here, RAID 0, 28% of you. In fact, the plurality of you chose RAID 1. RAID 1, in fact, RAID 1 is a very good example of a practical experience I had where there was a server set up with RAID 1. We walked in and saw that a drive in the RAID 1 array had failed. We went back to the log. The drive failed months ago. No one knew it. And nobody using the system even cared because the other drive continued to work properly. So we pulled out the bad drive, we put in a new RAID 1, it remirrored, it resynchronized, and we were back up and running with redundancy from that point forward. But if we had not replaced that drive and the other drive in the RAID 1 array had failed, obviously they would have no data. So there's only so much you can do when the redundancy is hitting you that way. If you're watching this video for continuing education unit credit, I would love to send you an email that certifies that you are here watching a 1-hour webinar category CEU. That's something that we can always use to be able to renew our certification if you're collecting CEUs. If you would like to earn that, here's how you could do it. You must follow these instructions. Go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. Click the Contact Us link. In that Contact Us link, please put your name, your email address. In the subject line, please put June Core 1, and then in the body of the message on a line by itself, put the super secret code words of the month, RAID 0 Drive Array. RAID 0 Drive Array. All 4 of those word/numbers need to be in there. And that's what you want to send to me. So again, go to the Professor Messer website, click Contact Us. The top or bottom of the page is where the Contact Us link is. In that form that comes up, put your name, your email address. In the subject line, please put June 2024 or June 2024 Core 1 or something so I know this was the June 2024 Core 1. And then in the body of the message, put the super secret code words of the month, RAID 0 Drive Array. And that would help you at least know what the options are when you are submitting your CEU. Takes me about a week to turn these around. Sometimes it takes longer. I just got a batch out that took a little bit more than a week, but I'll be better. I say that every time. I will be better on this to give you a better view of this. So hopefully that can help you too. If you are going through the list of waiting for your CEU, takes me about a week. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower, but we will get it to you eventually. That is the best way to earn that. And hopefully you'll now remember what you would need to know for RAID 0 and how you would recover if you were to happen to lose a drive. Now, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but I want to squeeze in a couple more questions. Would that be okay? I'm hoping that it would be. So here is the next question on our list. This question asks, a company uses a browser-based payroll system, and the service only requires a username and password. Which type of cloud model best describes this system? Would it be PaaS, community, SaaS, IaaS, or hybrid? 5 options there. The question again asks, A company uses a browser-based payroll system, and the service only requires a username and password. What type of cloud model best describes this system? Does it describe PaaS, community, SaaS, IaaS, or hybrid? If you think you know the answer, go to your link on your screen, go to professormesser.com/QA and lock in your answer. See if you happen to know what this is. This would be a good one to know. In fact, you should know all of these terms. They are all from the exam objectives. You should know what all of these are. And certainly the one that is associated with this question is going to be the one you want to focus in on. Make sure you know the differences between all of these and see if you know some practical examples of what these might be. It might help you during your studies, being able to figure out the cloud-based requirements and the terms we have to know for cloud-based systems and working through them. See if you know this by locking in your answer. Go to professormesser.com/QA. A lot of people locking in their answers. So it's another one where we all know the answer or we sort of know the answer. I think we might be able to bounce back on this one. We generally do pretty well in cloud-based questions. So let's see how we do on this one. The question again asks, a company uses a browser-based payroll system and the service only requires a username and password. What type of cloud model best describes this system? Is this PaaS, community, SaaS, IaaS, or hybrid? Which one is it? Well, let's see what you chose as the answer. We see that 69%, almost 70% of you say the answer is software as a service. 18% of you say the answer is platform as a service. And then it's single digits for infrastructure as a service with 7%. And then both community and hybrid systems are 2% apiece. Obviously, with almost 70%, SaaS is exactly the answer that many of us were hoping to find. And if you're someone who works in a cloud-based system and you don't have to configure it, you don't have to break it down, you don't have to do anything special to make that work, then all you have to do is log in. Then you're probably using software as a service. That is the one we were hoping to choose. Software as a service is one where we don't have to configure it. We don't have to update it. We don't have to manage it. We don't have to secure it. We don't have to do anything but log in. Now, that also means that next time we log in, there might be some new features there. They might have changed some things around. They may have updated the software. We don't have any control over that because it's software as a service. So a very good example of you're somebody who is trying to work through and understand what the different offerings might be and how you might be able to use this software. You should look to see how it's being used. So if you use, for example, if you're a Gmail user, that's software as a service. If you use Yahoo Mail, if you use other Outlook.com, that's all software as a service. You log in with your authentication credentials and all of the software is just magically there. We didn't have to write it. We didn't have to customize it. We don't have to manage it. We don't have to back it up. We don't have to restore it. We don't have to do any of this. It really works out nicely to be able to set it up that way. And if you are familiar with online mail systems and you use any of those, a lot of you do. A lot of you use Gmail. A lot of you use Outlook.com and other systems. You're using software as a service. And what could be easier than that? That is the right answer. That's the one we were hoping to find. And in fact, you can see that almost 70% of you chose that one. That is exactly the right answer. So it sounds like a number of you are already familiar with cloud-based systems that you need to know. These cloud-based systems are also a little bit challenging because there are other types of systems you might run into. Platform as a service is one that provides you with a set of building blocks, if you will, an area set up on a server that allows you to build and customize your own app. And whenever you start working through that, platform as a service can be very powerful because you get to customize and make it exactly what you would like. But this also means that you would need to know how to do the programming, or you at least have to have some staff that knows what they're doing to be able to use platform as a service. You can see now why software as a service is so popular. If you're someone who's not interested in writing your own app, software as a service can be pretty useful. IaaS, infrastructure as a service, is where you are only acquiring the hardware necessary to get that service running. So if you are using ProfessorMesser.com right now, you are using a cloud server that is IaaS. I pay for the compute engine, which is the CPU time. I pay for the networking. I pay for the storage. And that's about it. Everything else is my responsibility. They technically put the operating system on for me, but I could change that if I would like. I load up the software that I need to use, whether it's database software, caching software, content management software, or whatever I'm using. And then I am responsible for maintaining that. So if you go to my site and you purchase a product and you download it, you log into your member login and you download that software, that is all my responsibility because I'm running this as infrastructure as a service, and whatever software I put on that system is my responsibility to manage. Very nice to have that. So we also have other options here for community and hybrid. Community is a set of cloud services that are generally shared with people that have a similar goal. So you might have a group of companies or a group of organizations that buy time on a cloud-based system, and maybe they are all providing similar services and they can all share within the cost of that. And then, of course, we have hybrid. That was the last one on our list. A hybrid scenario is one that is a little bit of a public cloud, which of course can be seen everywhere in the world, and then a little bit of a private cloud to be able to do that. So this is one where you do see this a lot, especially most organizations tend to have some level of hybrid cloud-based services where they're doing a little bit in their own private data center, and they also have services they're providing to the world in a public cloud-based server, such as Amazon Web Services, Azure, many of the others that happen to be out there. So hopefully that's given you some scope, some idea on things you need to know about these cloud-based systems. And I think that would be a good place to kind of think about where the cloud is, how it's being used, and then what you would apply to that. Would that be infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service to be able to have that there? So hopefully you're familiar with those. If not, make sure you look over that domain 4 of your Core 1 and you become very familiar, because certainly questions about the cloud will show up on your exam. Well, I know we're well past the top of the hour, but let's do another question. I've got another one here. This one happened to be a question that comes from a book that I wrote, which is my Core 1 220-1101 practice exams book. It's a big book. 389 pages in this book. And inside of this book are 3 complete practice exams. 3 90-question practice exams. Each one of those practice exams has 85 multiple choice-based questions and 5 performance-based questions. So there's 15 performance-based questions in this book. A little bit of everything. So instead of just giving you a description of what this is, why don't I give you an overview? Why don't we take a question from the book? I have a question, and of course, same thing applies here. No answers in the chat room. Please no hints in the chat room. We're going to take a question that is on page 13 of my book. It's question A37. That question says, Sam, a user in the accounting department, is migrating from Android to iOS. She would like all of her emails, contact lists, and calendar events to be moved to her new phone. Which of the following would be the best way to accomplish this task? Would it be to use a Windows-based migration tool, save the Android phone data as a CSV file, connect the new phone to the corporate Microsoft 365 service, or use a USB to Lightning cable? Now, there is a set of answers that's available if you just want to know if it's A, B, C, or D. Fortunately, this is a PDF. So if you have certain things in here that you would like to highlight or comment on, if you're using something where you can draw on the screen, you can certainly do that. That's the beauty of using a PDF. And another part that's important with this is that if you just want to know whether it's A, B, C, or D, you can go to page 31. We're on page 13 right now. If you want the details, you go to page 72. You could, of course, scroll forward to page 72 and then scroll back to page 13 when you're done. but I've already created hyperlinks in this book. So all I have to do is click the words, the details, and it takes me to page 72. Boom. We're already on that page. It gives me the question again at the top, and it tells me the answer is C, connect the new phone to the corporate Microsoft 365 service. And you can see the answer of why that is the right answer is well documented there. One of the things that drives me crazy with online exams is first, the questions are not written in a form that even comes close to the same feel as the actual exam. And in many cases, the answers they give are just wrong. I see that all the time. And the other part that bothers me is I'll get the question wrong, legitimately wrong, but it doesn't tell me why I got the question wrong. But in my book, every wrong answer is also documented. So the incorrect answers are all listed, and then an explanation of why that is the incorrect answer is also listed, because I think this is a great opportunity to learn more about these topics. If I get a question wrong, let's close that circle and understand why I got the question wrong and why the right answer is right. So already I've learned two things when that happens. In fact, I'll highly recommend if you go through this book and let's say you just got the answer right. Answer C, connect the new phone to the corporate Microsoft 365 service. Yep, that's what I chose. I knew it was the right answer. Let's go to something else. Let's go to the next question. I would highly recommend before going to the next question, make sure you read through the incorrect answers, because all of these incorrect answers could also appear on your actual exam. And by going through the incorrect answers, you're effectively getting 4 different topics out of every single question. And all of the topics in here, very rarely would you ever find an answer that somehow did not appear in the exam objectives. That's by design, so that we can test you on everything you need to know in a book of only 3 separate practice exams. So it's a good way to take 3 separate practice exams and expand it by 4 so that we can fit more topics into the same book. That's by design. And since this is a PDF and I'm in my PDF reader, did you know your PDF reader has a back button? It does. It may not even be on the screen. You may have to put it on the screen, or you may have to find the hotkey for it. But mine has a back button right here at the top. And if I hit the back button, it takes me right back to where I started, and I can go to the next question that's in my book. So it's a quick way to jump back and forth between the practice questions that are in the book. They are all available for you. You can download this and start going through this book right now, immediately, by visiting professormesser.com/core1pe. And if you purchase the Core 1 practice exams in conjunction with the Core 1 course notes, get them both at the same time, there's also a cost benefit. Whether you get physical or digital version, get a little bit of a break. So there's discounts involved with those, and you should be rewarded for supporting us in that way. And we sure appreciate it too. It's a great way to keep things going here and make sure that you can also continue to get the things that you're going to need to help you pass that exam. Hopefully that's something that can help you too. That is available on my site, professormesser.com/core1pe, or follow the links in the main menu at the Professor Messer site. Well, as I mentioned, everything we talked about today comes directly from the CompTIA exam objectives. So if you're wondering, where are these objectives? Where would I download such a thing? Well, they're on the CompTIA website and they're free. I love the price of these. So go to professormesser.com/objectives to take a link that will drop you off right at the page on the CompTIA website, or simply go to your favorite search engine, type in CompTIA exam objectives. That's another great way to find it. It's usually the first link that comes up. This is available and it tells you everything you need to know for the exam. I've got one right here on my screen. Let's show you the objectives. Those are the Core 2. What was I doing earlier? Here's the Core 1 objectives. This is the PDF that you could download from the CompTIA website. Gives you an overview of the exam and then starts breaking out very detailed bulleted breakdown of everything you need to know. By the way, this is the same bulleted breakdown I use to build the videos. So you know that my videos contain everything you need to know to pass this exam, because I made sure I covered every single one of these topics on every single domain that is in this list of exam objectives. Incredibly important. It should be the first place you go when you start your studies, and it makes a great checklist before booking your exam, because it will give you that feedback you need to know on whether this is something that you need to know, something you don't know, maybe you need more study. It gives you all the heads up you need to be able to make the decision on what's important to know. all available in the objectives. Find that at professormesser.com/objectives. Well, we do one of these study groups for A+ every month. We actually do 2 A+ study groups every month, one for Core 1 and one for Core 2. Our Core 2 study group is in a couple of days. Come on back on the 6th of June for our Core 2 study group. And we've already booked the ones for July on July 9th and July 11th. Now, of course, these dates can change. Sometimes they change dramatically. If you ever want to know what the latest update is for our calendar, make sure you check the events that are on our website. Go to professormesser.com/calendar or check the events channel in our Discord. It's a great way to find out if anything may have been changed. Dates sometimes they tend to move quite a bit. Sometimes they don't move at all. That's the first thing I change is that calendar. So as soon as I know, you will know by checking in with the calendar and know exactly when that next event is going to be. Well, although we finished our Q&A in this first part of the show, don't worry, there's more Q&A coming, except in this case, you're the one who's going to ask me the questions instead of me asking you the questions. You can submit those at any time from the tabs at the top of your page if you go to professormesser.com/QA. Don't forget about my discounted vouchers on my website, which of course come with my free exam hacks ebook. You can find that at professormesser.com/vouchers. My practice exams, my course notes, and so much more are available on my site at professormesser.com/1101success. And of course, we have our Discord, our Facebook, our LinkedIn, our Twitter, our YouTube, our Instagram. If you ever want to find us, simply type in professormesser.com/ the name of the site you would like to find me on. So if you'd like to join our Discord, professormesser.com/discord. If you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a big thumbs up, you would go to professormesser.com/YouTube, or you could just give it a big thumbs up right now. And you could even subscribe right now if you're watching it on the YouTube. That would actually help us a lot too. We sure appreciate your support. Anytime you're looking for us, that's a great way to find us. And we do put our daily pop quiz questions out on Facebook, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn. So that's a great way to find those daily pop quiz questions. Hopefully that's given you something you can think about for your studies. Stick around for the after show. I'll take your questions in just a moment. And I want to thank you so much for being here. We love doing these live streams and we couldn't do them without you. Thank you for joining us. And we will see you next time on the A+ study group. Okay. We'll take a sip. We will now reset. There we go. And now it's time for QA. Let's see if I can get my screen set up so that you can see the QA part. We need to hide this, put that there. There we go. And that means that you can participate in this next, well, part of an hour anyway, to be able to work on. You could submit those questions from your link that's on the screen. Simply go to professormesser.com/QA, and there's a little tab at the top, and you can submit the questions that are on there if you ever want to do that. Some folks in the chat room were saying, well, what if I want to just ask you a question about something else not relating to this? You can always click the Contact Us link on the website. That's the best way to get in touch with me. If you already have an account, you can log into your member account and you can open a help desk ticket. If you're having some type of question issue, I'll be glad to address those there as well. What I'm going to do on this side, though, is sift through the questions that you have submitted already, and we will absolutely see what you might have in your list of things. So I'm going to slide over to my Q&A side, and let's go through a number of the questions that you happen to have here. There's a lot that's been here. Hopefully I've already answered a number of these. Some of you are asking about the Exam Hacks ebook. Where can I buy it? You can't. It's only included for free with any of my success bundles, or if you purchase a voucher, it is not available to purchase on its own. So it's another important part of the Exam Hacks ebook. A little bit of exclusivity involved there for what you're doing and being able to work through this. Okay, let's go through the list of the different pieces that we have in this list. And I think there's a couple. Let's first talk about this industry in general. And maybe some of you even have some scope here, some idea of things that you have seen, because I think this is a good one to discuss. This is from Dwayne, who is not The Rock, but could be a rock. We'll just put it that way. But he says, Dwayne, not The Rock. He says, I have a visual disability, and I'm curious, how do you feel the inclusion is in the industry? What are some ways I could make myself stand out aside from the obvious? So this is something I'm especially sensitive to. I have members of my family that are legally deaf. They're hard of hearing. They have all kinds of things they have to take with them all the time just so they can have some level of hearing. And that's one of the things you'll notice on my site, that there's a lot of contrast on so that you can see things on the screen a little bit better. I use screen readers to make sure that it's able to read through the content on my screen properly. And for those of you that are hard of hearing, I always have transcripts. You'll notice on YouTube, if you look at the closed captioning, you may think to yourself, this closed captioning is so much better than it normally is. Well, that's because I had a human do it and not a computer. And they watch my video and type these things in and are pretty close to the things that I'm saying. They get a lot of the technology words correct because they're watching me put them on the screen and they're typing them in the right way. No transcript is perfect, especially with closed captioning, but it comes very, very, very close. And I'm very pleased with the level of quality we have there. But this is a question more about, what about getting a job in IT if you have some type of visual impairment? And that's an important question. I have worked with people who have been quadriplegics and worked in the help desk. I have worked with people who have had visual problems seeing, who have been legally blind. I've worked with people who are deaf, all in IT. So these are, and what's interesting about technology is such an enabler. There are ways to figure out how to work around these problems by using technology in ways that you may not have even realized. And that's one of the things that constantly surprises me. Oh, we need captions. Let's just plug them into YouTube, and YouTube will give me a way to do captions. We need a way to allow someone who does not have any control of their arms or legs, can they work on a help desk? Turns out they can't. There's plenty of ways to set these things up. I would say probably, if you were to kind of break this down at a basic level, I would see the most inclusion with these types of systems. Sort of, this is not scientific at all. It's sort of my ongoing observation, because as many of you know, prior to doing this full time, I worked as a systems engineer full time, and it's one where I would go to many different companies and organizations throughout the day. So I have visited thousands and thousands and thousands of companies, both private companies, public companies, state and local government, federal government, practically any type of scenario. I have been in organizations that make high-end vehicles. I have been working with companies that brew beer and distribute it. I have worked with companies that were state and local government, and they ran DNA sampling. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting scenarios you can run into there. But the one that was probably the most flexible with giving someone an opportunity to work and to learn are some, maybe you wouldn't expect it. It's the state and local government and federal governments tend to, at least from what I've seen, have more flexibility there. And I think that's an important part of this, because first, state and local government and federal government type IT is a little bit different than IT you would find in a private or public organization, in a commercial company. And I think it's probably because there's so many different technologies you get to touch. Imagine a government where you have part of the government is responsible for creating laws. Another part of the government is responsible for distributing food. Another part of the government is responsible for defense. Another part of the government is responsible and law enforcement. Another part of the government is responsible for transportation. I mean, these are it's almost like government is 50 different companies kind of crammed under one big umbrella. What a great opportunity to learn about technology, because every type of technology you would be ever interested in probably exists in a state government. There's just so many different types to work from there. And along the same lines, they tend to be a lot more open to finding ways to get you to work. Not physically get you to work, allow you to work. So if you're someone who has hearing impairment, sight impairment. If you have a quadriplegic, you don't have a way to even move your arms or legs, they can find a way to have that work there. Now, to be fair, the person I worked with who was quadriplegic, that was not a government installation. That was a financial company. So it was a for-profit commercial company. And in fact, some of the more lucrative commercial organizations also tend to have more flexibility here, probably because they have more money. More money means more flexibility. It means the ability to have more options. And many of these companies have opted to provide people with the tools they need to be able to be successful in their job. So I feel like probably even more than other industries, I think IT is not only best prepared to provide these jobs to people regardless of their background, regardless of their capabilities, but perhaps is more open to it because we know how to use the technology. It doesn't scare us. In fact, we see a problem, we want to fix the problem with technology, and what better opportunity than someone who is having a problem walking, having a problem seeing, having a problem hearing? Well, let's see if we can fix that. How can we use technology to fix all of those things? It's really inspiring and really exciting to see us solve problems in this way that are more personal. You know, we often hide behind, we have to do a database upgrade. Yeah, we've got to take that database. We need to move it to a different file format, and but we have no idea why we're doing the database upgrade. And we have no idea why they're using a different encoding on that particular field of the database that we have to convert. There's no connection back to people. Well, here is a connection back to people. Here's using technology that directly impacts people. And I love that part of it. So if you're in IT and you're someone who is thinking about how can I solve these problems, that's a great problem to solve right there. That's a fantastic problem. And fortunately, we know how to solve these problems. So I would say, Dwayne, who probably is somewhat rocky, maybe not the rock, but a rock, I would think you're in the right place. So keep looking through the job postings, keep learning the technologies. There's a way to make this work. Find the people that are willing to work with you. And it's easier than you might think. More questions. Let's go back to our list to be able to have this. And by the way, a lot of the problems that everybody's got problems in some way. So sometimes your problem is more obvious than others, but there are ways to use technology in not just obvious ways, but also the ways that may not be completely obvious when you meet somebody from the very beginning. Other questions. Let's keep going through this list and break down some of these. Let's talk about the exams and how they affect what we are looking at. This is from the job I wish I had, which was game editor. Well, game editor, I want to know more about the game editing world. You could probably send in information about that. Game editor asks, will some questions from Core 1 show up in Core 2 if it is related to the material? This is obviously important if you're studying, because if you've gone through the Core 1 and now you're ready to start the Core 2 exam, do you need to go back and refresh any of that Core 1 content? Back in the day, if I go back 10 years or so with the A+ exam, there was a lot of overlap between the Core 1 exam and the Core 2 exam. So for example, you would learn about hardware in the Core 1 exam, just like you do now. You learn about all the hardware, but it doesn't ask you about troubleshooting the hardware until you get the Core 2 exam. So you end up having to sort of retain and build onto that content as you went into the Core 2. Now you'll notice that the Core 1 exam has both hardware and troubleshooting hardware. It has printers and troubleshooting printers. If you go to Core 2, it has Windows and troubleshooting Windows. So there's a much more of a separation between these two exams. And in fact, if you look at the exam objectives on both exams, you will find there is a significant split. There's very, very little overlap between the two. And I would recommend that if you are studying for the Core 1 exam, focus on the Core 1 exam objectives. If you're studying for the Core 2 exam, focus on the Core 2 objectives and the Core 2 objectives only. There is no reason, if you're studying for Core 2, that you also go back and study Core 1 all over again. I would not waste your time with that. Everything you need to know is in the exam objectives that are specifically written for that exam. And if there's anything you need to know that's sort of an overlap from Core 1, it will be listed in Core 2. So it's a really good example of things you need to know. So absolutely be familiar with that. I think that might help you on your studies. If it's not listed in the exam objectives, do not bother with it. Focus on the exam objectives. That is perhaps the most important thing I can tell you about this, and it will be an important part of your exam, is anything that's in that list. Don't waste your time going outside the scope of the exam objectives. An enormous waste of time. Now, people will send me notes all the time, and they'll say, well, yes, but when you get into a job, you're going to need to know things outside the scope of the exam. Yes. When you get into life, you will need to know things outside the scope of what you've learned so far. It's a sort of an important part of this. Yes, certainly that is the case. However, you are not going to get into a scenario where they will be asking you questions on an exam that are outside the scope of those objectives. So that's the important part to remember. At this point, our job is to get you the certification. After you get the cert, study whatever you'd like. Knock yourself out. I think that's the important part of this. So that's my feedback to you, is don't worry about memorizing everything all at once. I think that's a mistake. I think focusing on a single set of exam objectives is the best way to study for any of these exams. Other questions. Let's keep going through this list and knowing what these are. There is a focus. If you start looking at the questions that I see coming in, there's a focus on what do I need to know? Do I need to know this? Are these the topics I need to know? My answer is always going to be go to the objectives. Go to the exam objectives. That is your best bet. I'll give you this story because there was a lot of people don't even realize this. I was working, we were in our Discord chat, and somebody showed up and they said, I just failed my exam. It asked me a lot of questions I wasn't prepared for. And I said, well, what type of question were you not prepared for? Well, they asked me about port numbers, and then they asked me about software as a service. And then they asked me, and I said, hold on. Those are clearly documented in the exam objectives. That is the one that is the important part. They're in there. How did you not know that was the case? And they said, well, I thought the exam objectives was just an overview. It was just a broad set of suggestions. And I didn't even bother looking at it because I thought there's no way it gave me any detail. So they didn't even bother looking at the objectives. So we sat them down and said, here's what you need to do. You need to pull up the objectives and go to the first section, which in the case of the 2201101, the Core 1 exam, is Domain 1, called Mobile Devices. Section 1.1 is given a scenario, install and configure laptop hardware and components. And this starts with hardware/device replacement, battery, keyboard keys, random access memory, hard disk drive, solid state drive, and a migration between those, and then a hard drive or SSD replacement and wireless cards. Then you also need to know physical privacy and security components for biometrics and near field scanner features. So those are how many bullets do we have here? If we don't count the main topic, we need to know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 topics. There are 8 topics in section 1.1. Could you explain to a third party what, if there was a scenario, how you would install and configure laptop hardware, batteries, keyboards, RAM, hard drives, solid state drives, replacing those, and wireless cards. So you need to be able to have some familiarity with the process. Now, if you know anything about laptops or mobile devices, you know every laptop or mobile device does this in a little bit different way, but the broad overview is the same. So replacing a keyboard on a laptop, for example, has a very similar process. Usually you're taking screws out of the bottom. Maybe the laptop itself pops off the top. You take a ribbon cable out, you put the next one in, and there it is. So this is a really good example of this. Now, once you have that nailed down, go to the next step. Section 1.2, compare and contrast the display components of mobile devices, which would be LCD displays, which would include IPS, TN, and VA. We need to know about OLED. We need to know about the mobile display components, the Wi-Fi antenna connector and the placement of the Wi-Fi antenna, the camera/webcam, the microphone, the touchscreen/digitizer, and the inverter. So there is section 1.2. Now we need to learn all those bullets. So go through these one at a time. Break them down and understand what each one of these is trying to teach you. And if you can explain to someone else the importance of these, when they would be used and how they would be used, then you are in the right place, doing the right thing. That is exactly what the advice we gave to this person, so that they could now go out and be more prepared the next time they go through their exam. That's going to be an important part of your studies as well. Use the exam objectives. So important. Let's find another question on our list of what's here. Other things that are available. Let's go through this. Sort of an ad hoc from Wesley, who says, I've heard you say many times security requires a strong background in networking and operating systems. What would you say the most important foundational skills are for cloud? So that is a good shift. A lot of the times when I'm answering questions about IT security, I do often say you need a good foundation in operating systems. You need a good foundation in networking, because those two things are over on this IT security side. Interestingly enough, cloud is not much different. Cloud has its own challenges with security, but let's kind of take the security part of that and put it to the side. Cloud is nothing but operating systems and networking. It seems like that's, if you ever want a precursor to security, cloud really is a really good one, because it is you putting together with a little bit of a twist. So let me tell you what the twist is in just a moment. So of course, if you were to look at a cloud infrastructure, and let's take ProfessorMesser.com, for example, which is a 100% cloud infrastructure. So if you were to go to my website right now, you would be hitting a web server. You first would be hitting a reverse proxy, then a load balancer, then a web server. On the back end are database servers, caching servers. I think that's pretty much the broad foundation of the configurations that I have. So those are a bunch of different servers running. They're all running different operating systems. They are all separate cloud systems. But obviously they don't exist in the real world. They are in a data center somewhere, and they're carved out of an existing system as a virtual machine. So when you look at it that way, this is not unlike having physical devices set up in the room with you. You've just created virtual worlds of those and created what effectively is an application instance. If I had to recreate ProfessorMesser.com in a different data center, I would need those same servers configured in the same way to be effectively picked up and dropped down and created in that new cloud environment. And that is, when we talk about cloud, that's the beauty. If you can automate that, it's even more powerful. And that really is the secret sauce of cloud computing, is that you're able to bring a level of automation to this so that you can scale up at any time and scale down when things slow down, so that you can add additional cloud instances of other types by clicking a button and build out an entire infrastructure instantly. If you want to bring another cloud infrastructure online halfway around the world in a different data center, you just take a configuration file, move it to that data center, tell it, build my infrastructure based on this configuration file, infrastructure as code, as we say, and it will build out that infrastructure because you've simply defined it in a configuration file. You don't have to show up with a bunch of code and installation manuals and ISO files. You don't need any of that. You just tell the cloud infrastructure, build this server this way with this IP address and this software. Build this database server with this configuration, this operating system, this software. That's the beauty of the cloud. So not only is there an importance to understand operating systems, not only is there an importance to understand networking, but cloud layers on top of this scripting and automation. It's not programming. A lot of people call it coding, and we do, as I just mentioned, infrastructure as code. Technically, it is code. But I think when we want to really differentiate building an application and the folks that are the computer science folks from the IT folks who are managing cloud services. And in fact, there's enormous differences in application development versus scripting. So let's put those two things. They have their own challenges. They have their own idiosyncrasies. They have their own world that they live in. I would say there are difficulty levels between both of those, but they are unique in what they are providing. So I tell people all the time, if you want to be very, very powerful in the cloud world, knowing operating systems, of course, is important. Understanding the way they interact with the network, also important. But the one that all the employers want, the thing they're really looking for, is the automation. And this also applies in the world of Windows. I walk into some environments, and these are environments that have tens of thousands of Windows devices on their network. Scripting Windows is important. So knowing how PowerShell makes Windows automate is incredibly important. And it could be a real differentiator if you're looking for a job in this industry, is knowing PowerShell really well. Just the same, the challenge, or the thing that we work through in other operating systems like Linux, Mac OS, and Windows to some degree, we might be able to automate using Python. Python is a big automation tool, especially on the cloud. So I tell people all the time, if you really want your resume to be different, and you really want to prove that you're bringing something to the table that is hard to find, become familiar with PowerShell and or Python. Those are two great places to go. And I think if you know either or both of those, you have skills that employers are looking for, and you have skills that you're able to build on. Once you know PowerShell really well and you can really make it dance, you can move over to Python. You're thinking, oh, Python, the fundamentals are very similar. The process of scripting is similar. The logic that we apply to it is very similar. The syntax is different. The engine is a bit different, obviously. But there are similarities between these two. So once you start getting into one, don't think that you have to recreate the wheel. These types of scripting languages are very similar across all of these. You'll find yourself, oh, let's bring something up and create a Perl script very easily. Let's do a batch file. Let's do a shell script. Let's do a PowerShell. You'll find yourself scripting all the time, no matter what you happen to be in. In fact, you'll start thinking, well, in this Mac OS environment, how can I script it? How can I make this easier? How can I make it faster? How can I make it more hands-off? You find yourself doing it in a lot of other places. So it's another great way to focus on this. So if you're getting into cloud, know your operating systems, know your network, and know about automation. In the world of cloud, it's orchestration, but knowing Python, knowing PowerShell. So forget the fancy words, Python and PowerShell. Go learn some Python, go learn some PowerShell. That's your takeaway. You know how to do it. We always hear people go, if you want to have a system where you've got the orchestration and we have multiple users and we offer this as a service, your software is, could you tell me what it's doing? What is that? What's Python's PowerShell? What are you talking about? That's what they're talking about, is Python and PowerShell. The marketing-ish speak, we can somehow usually break down into what are they really doing? That's often our challenge. Now that we've heard someone talk for an hour, what did they really say? Let's go talk to the techie folks. They'll tell us. That's usually what happens. If you're ever in those trade shows or you're ever in that meeting and we just had the salesperson talk for an hour, now that they're done, where's the engineer? Let me go talk to the SE. What's he saying? What is he talking about? How does this work? Oh, okay, let me show you. And then we go through the details of how that works. Automation is so key. It is so important. That's my recommendation. Other questions. Let's talk about taking the exam. This is a common question I get from Anonymous, who says, have you had any experience with taking the exam from home? If so, do you have any tips for preparing the area you're taking the exam? Were there any issues encountered when taking the exam from home? Also, do you recommend taking the exam from home? Or do you feel it's better to take it at a testing center? This is a question that, depending on who you ask, you may get a different answer. So I'm going to play both sides of this particular answer on this one, just so we can really see what these differences are. I would recommend, if you are planning to take your exam from home, that you go to the CompTIA subreddit, go to reddit.com/r/CompTIA, and just list through the last couple of months of people who have taken their exam at home. Many times people will put their experiences in, and they tend to have one of two experiences. One group of people will tell you, it went great. I logged in. I used the app. I took pictures of the room. I sat down. I logged into the system. A proctor showed up very quickly. I never heard from them. A little chat box came up on the screen, but we never chatted. The exam started. I went all the way through it. I passed my exam. I clicked finish. They disconnected, and now I'm certified. Great. That sounds wonderful. In fact, that's exactly how it should go, is that process. It's when it doesn't go that way where things tend to be a bit more complicated, because it's difficult to create a secure environment somewhere where you've never been. And that's what these testing centers are, is a secure environment. One of the biggest challenges CompTIA has is, how do you make the testing environment secure? How do you prevent somebody from taking advantage of this not being in a testing center and perhaps taking the test information and making it public? They have a lot of concerns along those ways, and they want to be sure you're also able to take the exam, that you're not running into technical problems, and that you're able to get the best possible score. So what they've done is put a lot of rules in place when you are at home, when you're taking your exam somewhere other than a testing center. And that's because they wanted you to create a secure environment in your house. So they're going to require you get rid of all of the extra monitors that are on your desk. So if they came to my studio, they would say, no, you can't take a test here. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 screens in front of you. 7 if you count that little LCD right there. 6 screens in front of you. That's not going to work. You need to get rid of 5 of those. Have 1 screen. So that's just one of the many rules they have. Another rule they have during the exam is this one. You can't do this. Have you had any experience with taking the exam from home? If so, do you have any tips for preparing the area? You can't talk to yourself. Can't move your mouth. Even if you're not talking, you can't do this. Have you had any experience with taking the exam? Can't do that. Can't move your mouth. Can't say the question. Technically speaking, you can't do that in a testing center either. That would drive me crazy if you were next to me doing that. So don't do that in a testing center. It's also forbidden in a testing center, which a lot of people don't understand. But there are things you can do. You can have a glass of water on the desk. You cannot have a writing utensil on the desk. You can use speakers. You have to use speakers so that you can hear what's on the exam. You have to have a microphone so they can hear you. And you have to have a camera so they can see you. But you cannot have headphones. So there are a number of technical requirements when you're setting up the testing environment. And there are certain things you can and cannot do during the exam itself. Not to mention that there might be a scenario where you have a technical problem. What if the internet goes out in the middle of this? What if suddenly their connection is bad and they're not able to see you on the camera? They may stop the exam. So I tell people, if you're planning to take the exam at home, first, incredibly convenient. What's more convenient than staying at home in your pajamas? I love this idea. Secondly, it's an environment you're comfortable with. Perfect for taking an exam. So, and also if you live a long way from a testing center, and I've talked to people all the time, I live an hour by car. I live 3 hours from a testing center. Well, why would you drive 3 hours? Take your exam at home. Of course you would take your exam at home. But what I tell people is spend the time really reading through the technical requirements, reading through what's expected on those exam rules that they have on the Pearson VUE website, and absolutely read through other people's experiences that they had, especially if those experiences were not good, if something did not work properly. And the reason I'm telling you that is not so that you get angry or you're not happy with taking the exam at home or you think it's a bad idea. I tell you that because if it happens to you, you will be prepared and it won't faze you a bit. So if you're sitting there in the exam and you have your hand in front of your mouth, you're not even saying anything, just sitting there like this reading, they're going to pop up a message on your screen and say, please remove your hand from your face. Oh, that's right. But if you already knew that was wrong, you go, gotcha, sorry, got it, okay, back to where we were. And you just keep going. It's a normal thing. It doesn't even faze you. But if you didn't even read the rules, you're thinking, what are you talking? What? I can't have my hand in front of my mouth? What are you talking about? Suddenly you're out of your head is completely out of the game. You're not even thinking about the exam anymore. You're now jostled. What? I can't have my hand? Well, what else should I not do this? Where can I put my hands? Do I put them in my pockets? Now you're rattled. We don't want you to be rattled when you're taking your exam. So be very comfortable and familiar with the rules and understand what might happen if if something goes wrong with the rules, and be familiar with that. I'll also tell you, this can be good or this can be bad. Maybe you're almost done taking your online exam and right near the end, there's a problem with your internet, or maybe they feel you went outside the camera. Maybe they think you did this and that happened. Maybe they can't see you very well on the camera and they think you went outside the camera range. They will stop your exam. They will say your exam is over. You're done. No more exam for you. Period. That's it. The exam is done. You're over. Go away. Finished. The exam's done. We just revoked it. But what they don't tell you, and maybe they should, is when they stopped your exam, if it was not something egregious where they clearly saw you cheating, if it was something like that where you leaned down to pick up a pencil and suddenly, they just canceled your exam. Or maybe somebody walked behind you. You locked the door. You thought you locked the door, but your roommate came in and they walked behind you and they saw your roommate. They're like, nope, exam's over. That's completely legitimate. That's the rules. We knew that. But what they don't tell you is whatever you did up to that point counts. So there have been times when people have come into our Discord and they've said, I took my exam at home, worst experience ever. I sat there for an hour. I went through the exam. I was going through and double checking my answers, and my roommate came in and walked behind me and they canceled it. They said, your exam sitting is revoked. Now I have to pay for another exam. And I asked them, well, how'd you do? What was your score? They go, I get a score? I get a grade? I don't know. I said, well, you can log into your CompTIA account. It will tell you. They logged in. They passed. Whatever they had done up to that point was good enough that their score was high enough that they were able to pass the exam. So sometimes even when they revoke your exam there near the end, and this happens all the time, you could still pass. So don't worry about that part of it. In fact, one of the things that I find funny is, and I'm not sure why they do this, when you take your exam and you say, I'm done with my exam, you click, I'm done. It takes you to a series of survey questions you have to answer. These are usually demographic type questions. CompTIA tends to collect these. Where you live, what's your name, what's your background. They collect this information from you and maybe ask you a few questions about the exam. And only then do they tell you what your score was. So you go through the sample questions, the demographic questions at the end, and then it says, congratulations, you passed. And people will go, yes, I passed. Hey, everybody passed. And you go off camera and you're telling people you passed. But technically to the person who is the proctor, you're not done with your exam yet. You have to click off that page to really be done. And so they have revoked people's exam after they got the I pass screen. But you already passed, so it's okay. So they have this weird process where they will end your exam after it has ended, but you passed. You're okay. Now, most of those rules about what you can and can't do and the level of scrutiny on these rules is much less focused in an exam center. They do have a camera watching you. They are listening in an exam center. They are monitoring you in an exam center. But you could sit here with your hand on your mouth in an exam center and they're fine with that because they know there's not a recording system in the room. It's their room. They know there's not someone else in the room with a camera. It's their room. They can see who's in the room. So they are a little bit less severe when you're taking it at a testing center. And for that reason, I tell people all the time, just go to a testing center. If that's an option for you, go to the testing center. You can still go in your pajamas. That's fine. There's no judgment. Just go. You should probably put some pants on. Go to the testing center and take it in a testing center. And then you don't have to worry about any of those things. You just show up, take your exam. It's exam as a service. You go up, you take your exam, you leave. You don't have to worry about setting up the room. You don't have to worry about how you're sitting in the chair. You don't have to keep yourself in the screen of something. You just show up and take the exam at the testing center. And when you're done, you leave. You're finished. So that's the only reason I tell people that if I was going to take an exam right now, I would go to a testing center because I've got one down the street. But if I lived an hour away from a testing center, I'm not going to a testing center. I'm taking it at home. And there's lots of ways that you may want to take your exam at home. I think it's a great way to consider it. So let's see if I covered the questions from the Anonymous, who says that's what they have great write-ups on the Pearson VUE website about how to set up your testing area. And they tell you what's allowed and what's not allowed. They word for word, and they've done a very good job of keeping that updated. So make sure you read through that. Issues from home. People have issues taking their exam from home all the time. Sometimes these issues can be fixed during the exam. Many times it cannot. And they end up having to, maybe they lost internet, have to call back in, open a ticket, get a new exam voucher submitted, reschedule the exam, do it all over again. But if you know that's going to happen, happens sometimes. If you're ready for it, you're ready for it. And that's why I would say, yeah, take your exam from a testing center if possible, but if not possible, take it from home. That's why they have the exams available to take from home. Some good options. You've got things you can do anyway. So maybe that gives you a perspective as well. Let's keep going through this list of different things. A lot of good questions about exams. Thanks for submitting these. And of course, you can continue to submit your questions at any time with the links at the top of your page. Follow the link on your screen, professormesser.com/QA. Along those same lines about exams, we're going to bring this back. Funky in the chat room asks a really good follow-up that is a sort of tag to what we were talking about earlier with having some type of disability or something that would affect your ability to take the exam in that 90-minute time frame. CompTIA and others do have a way that you could set additional time if there is a reason for that. So if there's a medical reason or some need to set additional time on the exam, they can give you allowances for that. Let's see if I can find it. This would be for your exam. So they do have a series of testing policies. I think the thing that if you go through the setup or the testing policy page for CompTIA, they can give you information about accommodations. And it's in the, let me see if I can bring it up here. On the CompTIA website, search for candidate testing policies, and they talk about accommodations during an exam. They talk about English as a second language. They talk about physical accommodations. There's other ones in here, but they have a link on this page for requests for accommodations are handled through Pearson VUE. Visit the Pearson VUE website for details. Let's click on that, see what happens. What's the worst that can happen, right? And they give you, okay, request test accommodations, get started. And they can do this. And you select your exam series, CompTIA, there it is. Boop. And request test accommodations for CompTIA. There's a reasonable adjustments request system. You log in, there's guidelines, etc. Tells you exactly what you need to submit. So there's obviously a bit of work, a little bit of paperwork, a little bit of applications you have to fill out. Someone has to approve that. And they give you guidelines for the documentation. And then they'll tell you whether you can get accommodations or not. And it's all on the Pearson VUE website. So follow that link from CompTIA and you can get those accommodations. Something that, an extra 15, extra 30 minutes on the exam, it might be the difference between passing and not passing. So it might be something worth looking into. And I would absolutely recommend you do so. Let's go through some more questions on it. That was a nice follow-up, Funky. Thanks for sending that through in the chat. Other questions that you have submitted, other things that are here. So let's talk about studying. Let's talk about the process. It's from Andrew, who asks, how often do you get on the actual Discord and just host a study session? And how long would I practice to take the 1101? Both are good questions. I don't often host a study session on my Discord because I host these study sessions. So I give myself a little bit of a pass to be able to do that. So I often just don't get involved with the study sessions in the Discord on our website, on our Discord server. Most of the time, though, other people are already doing it anyway. You don't need me. Our community is really good. Someone will pop, and this can be done all yourself. And it's designed this way on our Discord. You may not have even seen this on many Discords. There's no channels on our Discord that are just there and waiting for someone to use. Instead, you click the channel and it creates a channel that is yours that you control. So you can allow people into the channel. You can kick people from the channel. You can change the name of the channel. You can broadcast audio and video on the channel. You can do whatever you want on your channel. Just builds it out interactively, immediately. You just click on it, it's yours. At the same time, someone else could open theirs up. So there might be someone who is, you're all going through videos dealing with A+, and you're talking about what you're seeing in the video. Other people may have a Security Plus channel going, and they're all talking about the 701 exam. Another channel might be for Network Plus. Another channel, people might just be hanging out and talking, which is fine too. Whatever you want to do, it's your channel. It's built out to be that way because I think we're all clear. We're all aware of this. You know, life is more than just studying. So meeting people, figuring out what other people are doing, what their strategies are, what they do when they're not studying for an exam, and how they plan on using this knowledge can be valuable itself in your career, in your family, in your overall view of what you plan on doing in IT. It might give you ideas of things you could do you never even thought of. So go there and figure it out. You know, it's just a place to hang out and talk with people who are doing similar things to you, with being able to similar certifications that you're doing, similar technologies that you're working with, similar exams that you're planning to take, or anything else. You know, it's a great place to talk with others and what they're doing. So that's why I don't usually pop open my own Discord channel and start a study session. I'm usually doing these anyway. But at least we have some ideas of how you can do this yourself or join somebody else's. If it's open, that means that it's open to everybody. And if they don't want you there, they'll just throw you out. Most people don't do that. Most people just open it up and you're good. I think that just works fine for a lot of folks. And that's what I would recommend you do as well. Let's go back to the questions and see what else you have submitted into this list. I could probably simplify things on my screen a bit. Let's look at the next one that has come through. This is a common question. I think it's worth talking to because we focus on certain topics and certain things about studying, but I think there are other ways to approach this. This is from Adam, who asks, what percentage on the practice exams would you say is adequate? Well, I have a list. If you were to look at my practice exams book, I have a description in the front. In fact, why don't we just bring it up since I'm talking about it and I have it right here. This is in the introduction of my book. And there's a section called, aptly enough, how to use this book. It's literally called that. There it is. How to use this book. Here's how you use it. And I explained how there's a couple ways you could do this. I explained the different ways you could do it. But in there, I give you a scoring chart. So if you get less than 63 questions correct, which is about a 70% and lower, that's all right. Now let's go 63 to 72 questions correct in the 90 that you get in an exam. That's about a 70 to 80%. Still not quite where I would like you to be. And then on the others, you get up to 80, 90. Okay, that's pretty good. I think you want to get 81 questions correct, over 90%, to really be comfortable going into the exam. You could probably get away with 80 to 90%. But I kind of give you a summary of that on why that's good or why that's bad. So if we look at those are just guidelines. They're not lines in the sand. They're not guarantee that you're now prepared for the exam. It's really to give you feedback on how you're doing with the exam process. If you really, really, really wanted to nail down how ready you are for an exam, you probably know what I'm going to say. You go back to the exam objectives. You go to the list and you go through every bullet, and can you explain to somebody how to swap out a battery in a mobile device? What's the process? Why would you do it? How would you know when to do it? What about a keyboard or the individual keys? That's another one. So how do you swap that out? When would you swap it out? Why would you swap it out? How about a random access memory, RAM? What's it even look like? How do you get to it? How do you change it? How do you increase it? Can you increase it? Why would you increase it? Those are the questions you need to ask yourself for every one of those bullets. So if you can do that in the entire set of exam objectives for every bullet, then you're ready for your exam. But maybe it's not 100%. Maybe you got 90% and you're ready. I would say 90% is probably pretty good. You got 90% of these bullets in, I think you're ready for your exam. But I think ultimately the practice questions are there to help you get a feel for the process and hopefully teach you something at the same time. But I think there's also a need to go down into the details of each objective and really understand them. Now, I realize this could take a long time. If I was to do that on any exam, it'd probably take me 6 months just because of the time I have. You may not have 6 months. So there may be a different percentage that you're comfortable with, or there may be different topics that you think you would spend more time on than others. That's completely up to you. And that's what I would recommend you do as well, is have a look at those objectives. I think that's your best barometer. Practice exams, some are good, some are bad. And a lot of them give you an overview, but you really don't know how prepared you are until you go through every single bullet of the objectives. I think that's really the most comprehensive and most accurate way to get a determination on how ready you are. Don't rely on someone else, rely on yourself. Rely on that list and you'll be fine. Other questions? I know we're after the top of the hour. We'll get a couple more in here before we are done. So next on our list are others. So this is a common one. I really didn't touch on it, but if you recall, it's also from Anonymous, who asked the question, if you recall our performance-based question from hour 1, the last item in the performance-based question talked about submitting or printing to a Windows printer and what protocol would be used for that. And SMB, server message block, is the answer to that one because Windows uses SMB to do shares, file transfers, permissions, authentication, and printing, among other things. SMB is used extensively in Windows to do that. So Anonymous said, well, I chose FTP because we're submitting this file to be printed. We use FTP. And FTP commonly does not submit print jobs. So already we could kind of dismiss it offhand. But when we start comparing SMB, there's a lot of similarities to FTP. SMB transfers files. FTP, file transfer protocol, literally in the name. SMB can access files that are located on a remote server. FTP can access files that are located on a remote server. It's the same thing, except the difference, obviously, is SMB has been specifically designed with enhancements and capabilities that fit it into a Windows environment, and Windows exclusively uses SMB to do this. Windows does not use FTP to be able to do that. FTP is a more generic file transfer protocol where I can transfer files from Windows to Linux, Linux to Mac OS, Mac OS to iOS, iOS to Android, Android to Windows. So FTP is much more generic, used across practically any operating system in the world, and allows you to transfer files using that more generic format. But it's also more structured and has more limitations. Windows allows us to connect to a file share, determine if the file share we're connecting to has the right permissions, allow us to add files to that file share, modify the permissions in that file share, and then submit a print job, all in Windows. FTP doesn't quite have all of those capabilities. I can log in and upload a file, download a file, create a folder, remove the folder, set some permissions, depending on the operating system, but it's not unique to a particular or specific to a particular operating system. And FTP is something I can use in practically any environment. So there are similarities, but there's certainly more differences. And when we're talking about a question, the question specifically, let's bring it up. Got it right here. Of course we do. Let's go all the way to top of my list. The question said, there it is. Let's bring up this list. And the question said, here it is. Send a job to a Windows network printer. Interestingly enough, Anonymous, the question originally said, send a job to a network printer. And I thought, that's a little too generic. I wanted to have SMB as the answer. So I'd already picked the answer. I was trying to write the question to that, which is what commonly happens when I'm doing this. And I put send a job to a network printer because that's what you would do with SMB. And then I thought, well, wait, there are other ways to send a job to a network printer. Some of those ways aren't listed in our list of protocols. There's an LPT protocol, for example, line printer. LPT is a very Linux-ish way and a very Linux-centric protocol, but not exclusive to Linux. But it certainly has its roots in that Unix world of sending traffic to a printer. That's the way Linux does it, is it use LPT. But in Windows, we don't use LPT. We don't use FTP. Windows, we use SMB. Now, could you find SMB in other environments? You can. In fact, if I plug in, I'm on my Mac OS device right now. I can send a file to a Windows device and use SMB because Mac OS has some SMB functionality built into it. But that's sort of the way Mac OS, Linux, and Windows are, is that there's probably an app or an extension or a plugin or a feature you can enable that would allow your operating system to talk to a different operating system in a more native way to that operating system. So Windows can also send LPT, line printer, documents to a printer. We don't commonly do that, but maybe all you have is an LPT server because it's a Linux environment. All right, well, let's load it up and have Windows send it via LPT instead of SMB. So there are ways to do that, but the protocols we need to know for A+, we're very focused. And in fact, the question we had talked about Windows, so it had to be SMB. That's why I stuck Windows in there so that you would know. Oh, they're talking about Windows. It has to be a Windows protocol. What Windows protocol would I use to send a print job? SMB. Every day, all day. So it was no way you could have gotten that one wrong. It was undeniable and specific to that operating system. There's probably other ways to do it in Windows, though, right? You could probably figure it out, a different way to do it, but not one that would correlate to the protocols you need to know for the A+ exam. Certainly important to know. More questions. Let's go through at least one more. Let's get another one in, I think, of other things that are here. I'm gonna answer this one because it made people crazy last time when I gave my opinion of AI. Zeb says, do you have concerns when it comes to AI in the networking space? I don't, because I can't find any AI that works in the networking space. All the AI that I've tried is interesting, it's encouraging, and almost exclusively wrong. It doesn't work. It's like you asked a 5-year-old, could you SSH into this service, restart the service, and then change the service to only start with a particular port number? And it just sort of, what? I got a keyboard. What do I do with this? It's just pointless. It just doesn't work well. So the thing I often say is that AI has promise, but currently it has a lot of A and it doesn't have a lot of I. And we really need the I part. The I part is missing because there's not enough there yet to really do anything worthwhile. A lot of people say, oh, I use it all the time for my studies. And I think, well, you've gotten half of your stuff wrong right out of the gate. Because I have spent a lot of time with AI. So I thought, this is great. It could write all of my pop quiz questions for me. It could write all of my books for me. It could do No, it can't do any of it. It's awful. It's the worst. It has a lot of potential. A lot of potential. It's just right now, today, as we sit here, not very useful. And I don't think you have anything to worry about. I think today, as we sit here, I liken it to when tablets first came out. For those of you that were alive when tablets were first introduced, especially the iPad, first everybody made fun of it. Ha ha ha, funny name, ha ha ha, iPad, ha ha. Then they started selling them. And everybody said, how many did you sell? You sold how many? Well, that name's just fine. iPad's great. But the thing that people said right out of the gate, well, they sold all these iPads. The world of laptops and desktops is over. That's it. You're out of a job. No more laptops. No more Windows operating system. No more Mac OS. What are all you IT people going to do now? How'd that turn out? How'd that work out for you? So that's why. I often say that AI is great if you need it to create an ugly picture. It can create an ugly picture for you. There's plenty of ugly pictures coming out of AI. It's very frustrating. In fact, I have a service that I use for a lot of the photos and a lot of the close-up pictures you see of interfaces and ports and cables. I use a third-party service to provide me with those pictures. That way I don't have to hunt around for a cable, take a picture. It's ugly, it's fuzzy, it doesn't look good. I just grab the stock photo and I'm licensed to use it, and I can use it in these videos. And I've had to specifically go into my system when I'm searching for something. Let's say I want to find a DB9 cable, DB9 interface. I have to tell it, please don't show me any AI pictures. Just don't show me any of them, because they're worthless. You can imagine AI trying to show technology. A lot of you are technologists. This is what happens. You're watching a TV show, you're watching a movie, you're watching something on streaming, and in the show, in the movie, somebody is on a computer and they're using some interface. Like, what is this beautiful graphical interface? That's not how computers look. That's not real. It's not a real operating system. Or they've got they're working and they grab a laptop and they plug it into a system. They go, we're going to interface it with the front end of the thing. Like, that's not how that works. It doesn't work. And of course, I've had to now tone it. Mrs. Professor Messer even told me, could you stop saying every time something is not accurate? Could you stop pointing at the screen and go, that's not how it works. Doesn't work that way. I'm just trying to watch the movie. She's like, okay, you're right. You're absolutely correct. She is, of course, correct. The thing that I find, though, is when I see the AI pictures come up of technology, I'm like, that's not how it works. That's not what it looks like. That's not a real thing. So I guess if you need bad pictures, that's great. And certainly there are concerns with AI when it comes to the things that AI does well. People have already in the chat room talked about deep fakes and these things stealing people's voices and making them say things they never said or making them look like they said things they never said. There are certainly concerns with that. I'm not saying that AI doesn't work in that context. That's perhaps a scary part of that technology. But for what we do in technology, in networks, in cloud, in databases, in operating systems, in all of the things that we work on, it's nowhere close to being a concern at this point. We need to keep doing what we're doing because AI, the A part we could use, the I part, just not there for us right now. So hopefully we'll get there someday. Maybe it'll be great. We'll all be out of a job. I suspect that's never going to happen, though. I suspect they're just not going to be able to get over that hump and make that work the way we would like it to allegedly work. So that's one of those, anyway, that we'll wait and see. I look forward to your cards and letters telling me how wrong I am. They'll just go in the group of all the others of how wrong I am. And tell me, now that tablets are here, your A+ is going to be worthless. You'll never need to troubleshoot an operating system again. Why would you ever work on this hardware? Thank you for your input. Other questions. One more. We'll do one more. Let's keep going down the list because that's a weird one to end on. I don't want to end on that one. So the real quick, someone sent me a note, said, so what port numbers do we need to know for the exam? I mentioned that there was a small list of port numbers we need to know that's much smaller than the 100. I bet you know my answer. Exam objectives. Section 2.0, specifically 2.1, compare and contrast transmission control protocol and user datagram protocol ports, protocols, and their purposes. I find it weird they specifically mention TCP and UDP in the title of this, but don't specify TCP or UDP on any of the port numbers. However, here are all the port numbers. Let's count them, shall we? Let's do this. 1, 2. I'm going to count some of these like FTP. I'm going to count as 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. I count 19. 19 ports. So you need to know 19 ports. There's the answer to your question. It's from the exam objectives. I said about 20. I think it's about 20. I think I did pretty good there. I probably knew that, right? I'm hoping that I did. I think in my mind, I knew that it was somewhere around there. But that is the correct answer. Go to the exam objectives, learn those port numbers. You do not need to know any more than what is listed in that list. Let's do a good user question as the last one. Let's take this question because I've seen this question posed in a number of different ways. And I want to kind of address this because it is a common question. We all want to get these exams done as quickly as possible. And we want to know how to get this done in the best possible way. We'd love to get this done in a week. So this question asks, what is the best way to prepare for the exam in 1 month? Now, I'm going to, as an aside here, keep in mind that most of these exams, on average, take someone about 2 to 3 months to complete, to do this really the right way. So that means, I guess if you do the bell curve, some of this stuff's on the outside of that. 1 month certainly could be done, but on average, 2 to 3. Let's continue. Is it possible for, not really a complete beginner, but kind of beginner in this kind of tech, to take both exams in 1 month? Oh, we're doubling down now. How should I prepare in terms of videos, books, etc.? I also have little budget, so I don't want to spend a lot. Well, now that's quite a challenge. Get through both A+ exams, no prior experience in the industry, do them both in 1 month, so on average, 2 weeks for each one of these, and do it without spending any money. Well, you can have it fast, you can have it good, you can have it at least, but you can't really have both of those at the same time, right? Can't really break that down into that triangle of figuring out the best way to do it is not necessarily the fastest way to do it, and not really the cheapest way to do it. So we've got a challenge there. If you did nothing else with your life, it's possible, but this really goes back to how quickly you can learn. And everybody learns differently. Everybody has a different base that they're working from. In this particular case, this question was asked by someone who says, I'm not really a complete beginner, but kind of a beginner in this type of technology. Well, not everybody's at the same place, at least with those ways to do it. So I think if I was to approach this, I would recommend going back to the exam objectives. So let's bring those up again. So here's your exam objectives. This is going to be your best way to track your time because you can start at the beginning. Let's go back to the first page of the exam objectives. You can start on the very first section, 1.1. How long did this take you? Did it take you an hour to go through all of those bullets and really understand them? You have to be honest with yourself. Do I really understand what they're asking for here? Did it take you a day? Did it take you a week? Maybe you really want to go deep with this stuff and it might take you more than a day or two. So after doing that, maybe you do the next section too. Go to 1.2, compare and contrast. do all the different display types and antenna connections and inverter and all these. Go through all of that one. How long did that take? Did it take an hour? Did it take a day? Did it take a week? So at that point, you should now at least have a feel for how long it takes to get through these topics. Well, now you can kind of take a step back. I've got section 1.3 and 1.4. I've got section 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5, 2.6, 2.7, and 2.8. Hardware's big. Section 3.1 all the way into section 3.7. It's big. There's a lot of stuff. Section 3.4 is big. Section 4 is kind of small, but it's, what percentage is section 4 of your exam? But it's 11% of your exam. That's about right, given the size of section 4. And then section 5 is troubleshooting, probably the hardest part. There's probably a larger curve on that one, all the way to section 5.7. So the scope of this is effectively given in the instructions of the exam objectives. You don't need to go deeper than what the objectives are telling you, but you also have to know everything that's here. So then the real question is, how long is that taking you? And then you can start extrapolating from there. Well, if that's how long it takes me, it's going to take me 3 weeks to get through this, 4 weeks to get through this, 2 months to get through this. You've got to figure it out from there and determine if that's even reasonable. I would say, if we look at the averages for A+, 2 to 3 months for each exam is pretty average. Some people do it faster because they've been in the industry for a while and they can push through it, and they just need to read up on things they might not be real solid with. They need to be familiar with what the exam is going to ask, certainly, so they're not surprised when they sit down for the exam. So it might take them a week to go through everything. Then they go in, take the exam, and they pass. There are people that come to our website. That happens all the time. But they've already got this foundation, this knowledge in the industry. So that's not the biggest problem. Biggest problem is just getting through the content and figuring out how long that's going to take based on your requirements and your knowledge and your way of learning and the speed that you like to learn at. Everybody has a different speed. So I think if you're someone who is trying to figure out how long will this take? I can't answer the question. I don't have enough input. We would have to sit down and go through that process I just described to really understand how long is this going to take for me. I think that's what you should focus on, is how long it's going to take for your way of learning to be comfortable and happy and prepared for walking into that exam room, because everybody has a different idea of what prepared really is. And I think using the objectives is probably the best barometer. It's going to really give you the feedback you need to understand if that's something that's going to work right or not. I think that's probably the best, most accurate estimation I can give you, is that I have no idea and you're going to have to figure that one out. And I think that's probably the best approach, I would think, because there is no better determination of what's on the exam than the objectives, and there's no better determination on how fast you can get through them than you yourself. I think that's probably the best way to guesstimate it. And then if none of that works, 2 to 3 months is average. You can work from there. If I was doing it, probably 6 months, but that's at least an idea of being able to work through it. Well, I think that's probably a good place to kind of finish up the course study group for today, our 220-1101 Core 1 A+ study group. Thank you so much for being here in the first hour and going through the Q&A that we have for you. I've already written the Q&A for Thursday. Come on back to our Core 2 study group. Be a great time to go through another set of questions specific to the 1102 Core 2 exam. You're going to have to take that one eventually anyway. I would also, please, I'm not above begging for you to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We would love you to be notified whenever we start one of these live streams. That's a very good way to be notified. We also have a mailing list, and we also put these out on the service formerly known as Twitter. We will send messages on LinkedIn. So a couple of different ways. If you'd like to know when the next event is going to be or what event might be available for Network Plus or Security Plus, it's all on our calendar. Go to professormesser.com/calendar, or if you're already in our Discord, which you can get to at professormesser.com/discord, you could look in our events channel, which I also update the same time that I update the other calendar. It's a great place to find out what's the next thing going to be. What are we doing? I'm heading over to Discord after this. If you haven't joined, be a good time to follow up there. There's probably already someone starting up a session for studying in the private channels there. Might be something to look into. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We appreciate you being here every month. We have such a good time doing these. We will see you next time on the A+ Study Group. Thanks, everybody.